They say some miracles are born in silence, when the world is still and most folks have given up hope. That's how it began for me, Elena Hayes, on a night when Wyoming's winter felt more like a punishment than a season. The kind of night when even the wind sounds lost, echoing across miles of untouched snow, rattling the bare branches like a warning. Our little ranch, tucked against the edge of a frozen lake, usually felt safe, a refuge my sister Paige and I built after our parents were gone, pouring sweat and memory into every fence post. But on this night, with the blizzard slamming against the windows and temperatures dropping fast, there was no comfort, only survival. I was setting out hay for the cattle, fighting the stinging air, when something caught my eye. A dark, unmoving shape out on the ice, so close to blending in with the twilight and snow that it almost disappeared. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. But then a gust of wind swept the powder off the surface, revealing a flash of russet, a wild tangle of mane. My breath hitched. It was a horse. Not just any horse, a Mustang Foal, small and limp, lying too close to the cracked, treacherous edge. Panic shot through me, chased by a surge of anger at whatever had left her here. I glanced up the road, spotted headlights, and saw old Mr. Cunningham, our neighbor, pulling over his truck. He rolled down his window, face pale as the snow. "Elena, don't do anything stupid! That ice is thin!" But there was no time. That foal was fading, and I wasn't about to watch her die. I shouted back, voice shaking, "Call Paige, get help!" before I tore across the snowy bank, boots slipping, heart pounding so loud I almost missed the awful cracking sound as my foot hit the edge. The cold bit straight through my jeans, water rising over my boots, but I pushed forward, reaching out, fingers burning as I grabbed hold of a sodden, icy mane. The filly, later I'd call her Ember for the stubborn spark in her eyes, was heavier than I expected, and her body was limp, barely breathing. For one heart-stopping moment, I almost let go, terrified that the ice would break completely and swallow us both. Then adrenaline took over. I gritted my teeth, heaved her across the ice, gasping as my knees smacked the shore. Ember shuddered in my arms, more dead than alive. Paige was already running from the house, hair wild, bathrobe flying. She dropped to her knees beside us, hands moving expertly over the foal, checking for broken bones, shoving her stethoscope into her ears. Paige's voice was sharp, urgent. "She's hypothermic, pulse is weak, we have to move, now!" The two of us carried Ember through the blizzard, every step a struggle, my muscles screaming. By the time we staggered into the kitchen, we'd left a trail of melting ice and muddy prints. Paige slammed the door and snapped into action. "Get towels, hot water bottles, anything warm!" As I raced around gathering supplies, the old neighbor burst through the door, dripping snow and worry. "That's a wild one," he warned, eyeing Ember's tangled mane and BLM tag clipped to her ear. "She's probably not going to make it. Should call the vet, but—" His words trailed off at the look on Paige's face. "I'm not letting her die," she snapped, grabbing the hairdryer and cranking it up to full blast, the noise drowning out any further protest. I wrapped Ember in every towel we owned, my hands trembling so badly I could barely tie the knot on the hot water bottle. The foal's breath was shallow, her eyes glazed. For hours, Paige and I worked in near silence, pausing only to check her vitals, massaging her chest, whispering prayers neither of us had believed in for years. Every so often, Mr. Cunningham poked his head in, shaking his own. "You two are stubborn, but if anyone can pull off a miracle, it's the Hayes girls." The blizzard raged outside, wind howling, kitchen windows fogged with heat and worry. Paige found an old bottle, warmed up milk, and tried coaxing Ember to drink. At first, The filly refused, lips pressed tight, but Paige's persistence won out. Drop by drop, Ember swallowed, too weak to fight, but too stubborn to let go. The minutes stretched into hours, exhaustion clawing at my bones. Still, neither of us dared stop. I remembered every animal we'd tried and failed to save over the years. Every hard lesson Wyoming had ever taught us about nature and letting go. But this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the way Ember's small body shivered with every beat of her fragile heart, or the way Paige wiped away a tear she thought I couldn't see. At some point, the old vet, Dr. Garrison, arrived, summoned by the neighbor. He looked Ember over, lips set in a grim line. "Slim chance," he muttered, but he set up an IV with steady hands, talked us through every step, and left us with instructions and a little hope. Through the long, sleepless night, Paige and I took turns sitting by Ember's side, whispering stories about wild herds and summer grass, as if our words could coax her back from the edge. The storm began to break at dawn, painting the kitchen in a pale blue glow. I leaned closer, desperate for any sign of life, and that's when it happened. A faint, raspy whinny, barely more than a breath, but real enough to break the tension that had choked the room for hours. Paige covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks, and for the first time since the storm began, I let myself believe in miracles. Ember was alive, against every odd, every warning, every bitter rule of nature. She had survived, and as the first rays of sun lit up the snow outside, I knew our lives would never be the same again. The kitchen smelled like wet horse, burnt toast, and adrenaline. Daylight bled through the frost-bitten window panes as Paige and I hovered over Ember, both of us running on fumes. If not for the faint rise and fall of Ember's ribcage beneath the towels, I would have sworn we'd imagined that weak whinny. The filly looked impossibly small now, bundled up in our old ranch blankets, her mane still caked with ice, legs tucked tight to her belly as if she could make herself disappear. But there was no time for relief. Ember's breathing was shallow, chest barely moving. Her ears twitched once, twice, but she didn't respond to the touch of my hand. I glanced at Paige, saw the lines of exhaustion and worry etched deep. She was already setting up the space heater by the stove, cranking it high. "We need more heat, more circulation," she muttered, kneeling to rub Ember's chest in slow, careful circles. I nodded, grabbing the hairdryer again and aiming it gently at the filly's flank, shifting back and forth, anything to keep her core temperature from dropping any lower. The world outside the window looked like another planet. Wind still howling, snow drifting high against the barn. We were sealed inside with hope and desperation. "Try the bottle again," Paige urged, voice tight. I knelt by Ember's head, warming a bottle of milk with trembling hands, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself think. I pressed the rubber nipple to Ember's lips, whispering softly, "Come on, little one. Don't quit on us now." At first, nothing. Then her tongue twitched, just a flicker, and she managed a single swallow. I let out a shaky breath, relief and fear tangled together. Paige offered a weak smile, but her eyes were sharp, tracking every detail. "That's good. Just a little more, that's it." Just then, the phone rang, loud in the hush. I jumped, nearly dropping the bottle, but Paige caught it, cradling the phone between chin and shoulder. "Hayes residence. Yes, she's stable. Well, barely." She listened for a moment, then nodded, meeting my gaze. "Thank you, Dr. Garrison. Yes, we'll keep her warm. Please hurry." The old vet had promised to check back in, but storms in Wyoming make liars of even the best intentions. Instead, it was our neighbor Bill who braved the roads, boots thudding across the porch as he burst in, arms full of supplies, blankets, hand warmers, even a half-empty can of propane for the space heater. "Figured you'd need these," he grunted, glancing at Ember with a kind of wary respect. "That foal's got more luck than sense, ending up on your porch." Bill helped Paige set up the IV line, following the vet's instructions over the crackling landline. His hands were steady, but his brow furrowed as he watched Ember. "She's wild, you know. You save her, she might never trust a soul. Sometimes the wild ones don't make it, even when you do everything right." I didn't answer, couldn't. Instead, I focused on Ember, watching for any sign she was fighting. Minutes ticked by, tense, endless. Paige checked her temperature, nodded grimly. Still low, but not dropping. That's something. We took turns through the long, gray morning. Paige massaged Ember's legs to keep her blood moving, whispering soft encouragement. I warmed towels in the dryer, pressing them to Ember's sides. Every so often, I'd catch Paige blinking back tears, jaw set stubbornly against the odds. At some point, the wind eased, the snow slowing to gentle flakes. The world outside softened. Dr. Garrison finally arrived, stomping snow from his boots, cheeks red from the cold. He moved with quiet efficiency, checking Ember's vitals, listening to her heart. After a moment, he nodded, lips pursed. "She's still with us. Keep doing what you're doing. Fluids, warmth, patience." He helped adjust the IV, then pressed his hand to my shoulder. "You two are giving her a chance. It's more than most would. But you need to be prepared. Sometimes the body can't keep up with the spirit. If she survives, it'll be because she's got more grit than most Mustangs put together." After he left, we settled into a fragile routine, tending Ember, jotting down every change in a battered old notebook. Her temperature crept up, breath growing a little deeper. I watched Paige move around the kitchen, fierce and focused, refusing to let fear get the better of her. By late afternoon, Ember opened her eyes, blinking in confusion at the ceiling, then at me. It was the first time I saw that fire, the wild, unbroken spark buried beneath exhaustion and cold. I smiled, heart aching with hope. "Hey there, tough girl. Welcome back." Bill dropped by again, bringing coffee and sandwiches we barely tasted. He stood at the edge of the kitchen, watching quietly as Paige coaxed Ember to her feet. The filly staggered, knees trembling, but Paige steadied her, murmuring encouragement. After a minute, Ember managed a shaky step, then collapsed into the blankets, spent but alive. "You might just pull this off," Bill admitted, a glimmer of pride in his voice. "But you'll need more help. There's folks in town who care about these wild ones. Maybe they can chip in. Supplies, advice, whatever you need." The rest of the day passed in a blur of tiny victories and setbacks. Each breath Ember took was cause for celebration. The night fell, and the kitchen lights cast long shadows across the floor. Paige leaned against the counter, exhaustion written in every line of her face. She's not out of the woods, but she's fighting. That's all we can ask. I sat beside Ember, running my fingers through her mane, promising her the world. Outside, the snow had stopped, the silence heavy but somehow hopeful. For the first time in hours, I let myself dream, not just of saving Ember, but of giving her the freedom she was born for. No matter what tomorrow brought, we weren't giving up. Not tonight. Not ever. Recovery, I learned, isn't a straight line. It's a shaky, winding road full of setbacks and small, precious victories. After that first terrifying night, Paige and I took turns keeping watch over Ember, never leaving her side for more than a few minutes. We set up an old cot in the corner of the drafty feed room, not wanting to risk moving her back out to the barn, where the cold could still be fatal. The kitchen was too bright and noisy. The feed room, with its earthy smells and dim light, felt more like a sanctuary. Paige, always the more methodical of us, insisted on charting everything. Ember's temperature, her pulse, the amount of milk she managed to swallow each hour, the smallest flicker of movement. I teased her that she was starting a new novel, The Daily Dramas of a Wild Mustang. She grinned, but I could see the worry in her eyes every time Ember coughed or went still for too long. Ember was quarantined from the rest of the animals, and the rule was strict. No visitors except for Dr. Garrison, and only after scrubbing up like we were in surgery. Wild Mustangs can carry all kinds of things, Paige reminded me, and Ember's immune system was already battered. Even our ranch dogs were banished from the room, which they didn't take kindly to. Every now and then, I'd hear Max scratching at the door, whining to be let in. Days blended together in a haze of bottle feedings, temperature checks, and gentle, careful grooming. Paige would sometimes bring her guitar and play softly in the evenings, her fingers strumming slow lullabies as Ember slept, her breathing raspy but stronger each night. I wrote down every sign of progress in Paige's notebook. A tiny list of miracles. Monday, 8:20 a.m., lifted head for the first time. Monday, 10:12 a.m., finished full bottle. Monday, 2:30 p.m., nickered when Paige came in. The whole community seemed to rally around us, even though only a few had met Ember. Dr. Garrison stopped by almost daily, bringing donated supplies from other ranchers, a bale of alfalfa here, a tin of foal formula there. He'd nod in quiet approval at Ember's progress, then retreat outside to his old pickup, making it clear he didn't want to get too hopeful. "She's got a chance now, that's all I can promise," he'd say, hat pulled low over his eyes. Then there was the outpouring from the town, thanks to a post on the local community Facebook group. Paige, who rarely used social media, uploaded a photo of Ember bundled in blankets, with a plea for help. The response was instant and overwhelming. Blankets left at our gate, messages of encouragement, and even a GoFundMe link started by someone we'd never met. One night, Bill drove up with his daughter Katie, a shy girl with freckles and an armload of carrots. "For when she's ready," Katie whispered, eyes wide with awe at the sight of Ember. Paige gently explained that carrots would have to wait. Right now, milk and rest were all Ember could handle. As the days warmed, Paige and I took turns sleeping next to Ember's stall, sometimes drifting off with our fingers entwined in her mane. In those quiet moments, the world shrank down to the rhythmic sound of Ember's breath and the creak of the old feed room walls. We read every message from the community out loud to her, half joking that maybe she'd understand how many people were rooting for her. There was one moment that sticks with me, one I'll never forget. Paige called me in from the yard, her voice trembling. I hurried inside, half expecting the worst, but what I saw made me laugh and cry at the same time. Ember, still wobbly on her feet, was pawing at the old BLM tag clipped to her ear, as if it suddenly itched. Paige knelt beside her, hands gentle but sure, and slowly removed the battered plastic tag. She examined it with a frown, then handed it to me. "She was part of a roundup," Paige murmured. "She's not just wild. She's officially unclaimed property of the government." That tag, just a bit of plastic, stamped with a string of numbers, suddenly felt like a warning. Ember's survival wasn't just a medical miracle. It was now tangled in a mess of legal uncertainty. Unbranded Mustangs in Wyoming weren't just wild animals. They were, by law, under the watch of the Bureau of Land Management. The thought made me uneasy. What if someone reported her? What if we lost her just as she was starting to live? Paige tucked the tag into the notebook, her lips pressed tight. For now, she's safe. That's what matters. We'll figure out the rest." But even as she said it, I could see the worry flickering in her eyes. Despite all this, Ember's strength grew every day. She learned to nudge the bottle herself, and once, when Paige dozed off during a midnight feeding, Ember let out a snort so sharp it startled her awake. She started to test her legs, teetering like a newborn fawn, then falling back into the hay with a grunt of frustration. Sometimes she'd stare out the feed room window at the distant ridge, ears perked, nostrils flaring, as if she could smell the wind and the wild herds out there somewhere. Recovery was fragile and full of doubt. There were days she seemed to slide backward, her breathing shallow, her eyes dull. But then, almost miraculously, she'd rally, a stubborn gleam in her gaze, a tiny burst of energy that carried her through another night. Each time I watched her fight, I felt my heart catch. She was a survivor, born wild and refusing to surrender. Through it all, Paige and I clung to hope, our lives revolving around the filly in the feed room. We didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, Ember was here, alive. And that was enough. Faded comma replaced by a slow, anxious calm. Recovery brought its own rhythm. Feedings, note-taking, long silences broken only by Ember's low nickers or the wind rattling loose shingles. By now, spring crept up on us, the thaw revealing muddy pastures and patches of stubborn snow. Yet inside the feed room, another kind of transformation was happening, one that had nothing to do with the seasons. Ember grew stronger by the day, and with that strength, something else surfaced, her wildness. In those first fragile weeks, she'd pressed close to Paige or me, seeking warmth and comfort. Now, with her legs steadier and eyes brighter, she started to test the boundaries of her world. The smallest sounds, a sudden bark from Max outside, a dropped bucket, made her flinch and back away, muscles tensing. Sometimes she'd snort and stomp at the old stall door, ears pinned flat, wild eyes locked on the movement of shadows across the wall. She wasn't mean, just wary, instinct screaming at her that everything in this human world was a threat. I watched her one evening as a storm rolled in, her nostrils flaring at the thunder, head tossing restlessly. I reached out a hand, palm open, speaking softly. She sniffed my fingers, then jerked away, planting herself in the farthest corner of the stall. It hurt a little, but I understood. For Ember, trust was a fragile thing, as easily broken as ice on the lake. Paige and I debated what to do. Paige's training as a vet tech told her we had to prepare Ember for something bigger than the safety of our ranch. If she's ever going to make it out there, Paige insisted, she has to remember what it means to be wild. It stung. This idea that, after fighting so hard to save her, our job was now to teach her to live without us. That's when Joe Garcia entered our story. Joe was a local Mustang advocate, small, tough, sun-baked by years on the range. She pulled up to our place in a battered blue truck, her voice brisk but warm as she introduced herself. "Heard you two are playing mother hen to a wild one. Mind if I take a look?" Joe didn't coo or fawn over Ember. She studied her like a wildflower, admiring but hands-off, moving slow and speaking low. "She's got the look," Joe said, nodding at Ember's restless energy. "The wild ones, they never really lose it. You just have to give her space to remember who she is." She explained her philosophy. No treats from the hand, no petting for comfort. Instead, she taught us how to feed Ember from a distance, laying out hay and water and then backing away, letting her approach on her terms. When Paige worried about Ember's nerves, Joe only smiled. "That's good. She needs to be wary. The world's not kind to Mustangs who get too used to people." Joe also showed us how to start rewilding Ember, letting her spend more time outdoors, even if it meant sleepless nights for us. We'd leave the stall door open on mild days, letting her wander the small, fenced pasture. She'd bolt at the sight of a new person, circling the fence line with her tail held high, but she always returned to the shelter when she needed it. We set up recordings of wild horse sounds, distant whinnies, the pounding of hooves, hoping to stir old instincts. Joe even brought clippings from the range, handfuls of sagebrush and prairie grass, scattering them near the fence so Ember could smell the wild again. It was a slow process, full of heartbreak. Each time Ember flinched from my hand, I reminded myself that this was love, a different kind of love than the warm, comforting kind. It was love that let her go, little by little, back toward the world she came from. I caught Paige crying one night, sitting by the open window as Ember grazed outside. "It's not fair," she whispered. "We save her just to send her away. What if she needs us and we're not there?" I had no answer. All I could do was put an arm around her and watch Ember silhouetted against the fading sun, her coat shining, her head lifted to the wind. The ache of letting go settled deep, a bittersweet pride tangled with grief. Still, there were bright moments. Ember learning to play, bucking and kicking in the mud, tossing her mane in triumph. Sometimes, on the rare days she'd let me close, I'd see a softness in her eyes, as if she remembered the warmth of the feed room and the quiet songs Paige played at night. But it never lasted. The wildness always returned, stronger than before. Joe's visits grew more frequent, her advice sharper. "She's almost ready," Joe told us one morning, watching Ember pace the far fence line. "You're doing the right thing, even if it hurts." Those words lingered as the days grew longer. Every sunrise a countdown to the inevitable. Ember was becoming what she was always meant to be. A wild Mustang, wary, proud, and utterly free. And as much as it broke our hearts, Paige and I knew our greatest gift was giving her the chance to choose her own path, even if it led away from us. That's the price of loving something wild, I guess. Knowing when to let go, and trusting that what you've given will help them survive. Spring swept over Wyoming with a hard, muddy thaw, the sort that wakes up the whole valley in a matter of days. Patches of snow shrank back into the shadows, the creek swelled with meltwater, and everywhere you looked, things were growing, hope and fear among them. On our ranch, the rhythms changed. We spent our mornings letting Ember out to graze, our afternoons tracking her progress in that battered notebook, and our evenings worrying over the things we couldn't control. Word spread faster than the wind in small towns like ours. Folks knew we'd rescued a wild Mustang, and most were happy to lend support, blankets, advice, or just a kind word at the feed store. But not everyone saw Ember as a miracle. Some, like Bill's cousin over at the Miller place, grumbled about wild horses eating up grazing land. Others worried we were breaking some unspoken rule, sheltering an unregistered Mustang. One morning, as I finished tossing hay over the back fence, I spotted a familiar pickup pulling into our drive. It was Bill, hat low over his brow, truck bed rattling with a new load of feed. He got out and met me at the gate, his face troubled. "Morning, Elena. Brought you some extra alfalfa. Figured you could use it, with that filly eating like a draft horse now." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. We walked the fence line together, Bill watching Ember graze at the far end of the pasture. Finally, he spoke, voice low. "You heard the news about the BLM?" My stomach tightened. "What about them?" "They're moving up the roundup. Bureau's under pressure from some of the bigger ranchers east of here. Too many Mustangs, not enough grass, or so they say." They'll be sending crews out next week, maybe sooner. Any wild horse they catch without papers gets tagged and sent to the holding pens down by Laramie. Even the foals." He paused, looking me straight in the eye. "If they see Ember here, they'll take her. Doesn't matter what you've done to save her. To them, she's just another mouth to feed." His words hit harder than the late frost. All the work we'd done, the sleepless nights and quiet victories, suddenly felt fragile, like a window about to shatter. I watched Ember, tail flicking, her coppery coat bright against the greening grass. She was so close to the life we wanted for her, and now the world was closing in. Paige took the news even harder. When I told her that evening, she slammed the notebook shut, hands shaking. "It isn't fair, Lena. She's not just a number. She's a survivor. She deserves a chance." There was fire in her eyes, the same wildness I saw in Ember. We sat with Joe Garcia on the porch, seeking wisdom in the dusk. Joe nodded grimly, not surprised. "It happens every year. They want the land, not the wild ones. You can try to hide her, but it's risky. If they catch you, there could be fines, maybe worse. But if you want my advice, keep her out of sight until this blows over. And if she's strong enough, start getting her ready for release." That night, fear replaced routine. Paige and I led Ember out under cover of darkness, through the back gate and into the stand of cottonwoods where the pasture dipped low, out of sight from the road, hidden by brush and new leaves. It wasn't much, but it was better than leaving her in the open. Every day brought new tension. Trucks from the Bureau started showing up in neighboring fields, government plates flashing in the sun. Men with clipboards watched the herds, counting and cataloging. We made up excuses for why Ember stayed out of sight. She's still weak, or she spooks easy, so we keep her close. But we could feel the eyes on us. Every time a stranger slowed their car near our fence, my heart stopped. Paige became Ember's shadow, checking the perimeter, moving her at dawn and dusk. I called Dr. Garrison and asked for advice, my voice trembling with questions I was afraid to ask. He sighed. "All you can do is keep her hidden and hope the roundup passes quick. You did your part. Sometimes, that's all we get. But hope isn't always enough." Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, a white government truck rolled past, slowing just a little too long by our mailbox. Paige and I watched from the kitchen window, hands clenched tight. Ember stood in the shadows, perfectly still, as if she knew her freedom was on the line. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay awake listening to every distant engine, every bark from the dogs. In the morning, the fear was still there, sharp and unyielding. We began preparing Ember for more than just release. We prepared her to survive without us. We kept her away from the house, stopped all treats and gentle petting. Paige trained her to run at the sound of trucks. Joe coached us on how to make her wary again. It felt like betrayal, undoing all the trust we'd built. But it was the only way. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day, the sense of urgency grew, fear mixing with hope, love tangled with the knowledge that the time was coming, sooner than we ever wanted, for us to let Ember go, and trust that she'd find her own way in the wild. There's a particular ache that comes with knowing you have to let go of something you fought to keep alive. It settled into our home like a second winter, cold and unavoidable. Every time I looked at Ember, her coat shining with health, her stride gaining confidence, her spirit so obviously wild, I felt pride twist together with sorrow. Paige tried to keep busy, but I caught her sometimes just staring out the window toward the back pasture, lips moving in silent conversations she'd never say aloud. Joe Garcia visited more often in those days, her truck crunching over the gravel at odd hours. She brought bags of feed and, more importantly, experience. "This part's harder than the rescue," Joe told us one morning as she sipped bitter coffee on our porch. "Saving her was one kind of love. Teaching her to survive is another. You're doing right by her." Joe's plan was simple on the surface, brutal in practice. Break Ember's trust, bit by bit, so she'd fear humans and stay clear if the BLM or anyone else came near. "No more treats, no more petting," Joe said, her eyes soft, but her voice steel. "When a truck comes down the road, make noise. Scare her. Teach her to bolt." Paige protested, her voice breaking, but Joe shook her head. "Wild means alive. She needs to remember that." We started that day. The shift was immediate and painful. Ember, expecting soft words and a gentle hand, instead met distance and indifference. When she'd come close, I'd step back, refusing to offer comfort. The first time a truck engine echoed across the valley, I banged a shovel against the fence, yelling loud enough to send Ember sprinting to the far edge of the pasture. She spun, nostrils flaring, betrayal written plain in her eyes. I turned away so she wouldn't see my tears. Paige took it even harder. She'd spent so many nights curled beside Ember, reading her stories, humming lullabies. Now she forced herself to leave the pasture after feedings, ignoring the soft wickers that had once meant trust. At night, I found her curled up with that battered notebook, writing things she never let me read. But Ember was resilient. The lessons took hold quicker than I expected. Within a few days, she was wary of every approach, watching us from a distance, ready to run at the first sign of trouble. It broke my heart, and mended it all at once. She was becoming what she needed to be, untouchable, uncatchable, her own. We called Dr. Garrison for one final checkup. He arrived at sunrise, his face drawn with fatigue but smiling at the sight of Ember. He examined her carefully, checking her heart, her lungs, the old scars on her legs. "She's ready," he said at last, standing back and letting the morning light catch in Ember's mane. "You did everything right. She's wild again, and she's strong." Paige wiped her eyes. "But what if something goes wrong? What if she gets hurt, or they find her anyway?" Dr. Garrison shrugged, his voice gentle. "That's the bargain, Paige. The wild is riskier than a pasture or a stall, but it's hers. You gave her a chance most don't get. That's what matters." The night before we planned to set Ember free, the house was quiet. Even Joe lingered longer than usual, telling stories about Mustangs she'd helped before, some that made it, some that didn't. "There's a magic in letting go," Joe said quietly. "A kind of courage, too. Most folks can't do it." After Joe left, Paige and I sat on the porch swing, watching the stars blink into life over the ridge. Ember moved in the shadows, restless but whole. "I don't know how to say goodbye," Paige whispered. "Not really." I reached for her hand. "Maybe we don't have to. Maybe it's not goodbye. Just giving her back to where she belongs." We packed a small bag with supplies, just in case we needed to intervene, just in case something went wrong at the last second. In my heart, I knew we probably wouldn't get another chance to help Ember. If she ran, really ran, she'd disappear into the wild herds and be lost to us forever. Dawn came early, all pink and gold and cold mist over the field. Joe arrived before sunrise, her truck's headlights bouncing along the dirt road. Together, the four of us moved through the silent house, each step heavy with anticipation. Paige checked Ember's halter one last time, not to lead her, just as a precaution for the walk down to the pasture's far gate. Ember seemed to sense something was different. She hesitated when we reached the gate, head high, eyes searching each of us for answers. I could barely speak, fear and hope warring in my chest. Paige knelt down, whispering something only Ember could hear. Jo nodded to me, her expression fierce and proud. "Now, Elena." With trembling hands, I undid the latch. The gate swung open on its old hinges, creaking into the morning quiet. For a moment, Ember just stood there, caught between two worlds. Paige pressed her fists to her lips, tears streaming down her face. Ember looked back, once, twice, then she bolted, mane streaming, hooves flashing as she disappeared over the rise. The sound of her running, free and wild, echoed long after she was gone. We stood together in the early light, silent, hearts broken and full at the same time. Jo put her arm around us. "You did it. That's real love." And though my heart ached with the loss, I knew we'd given Ember what she truly needed. Not safety, not comfort, but the chance to be wild again. The morning of Ember's release broke with a hush so complete, it felt as if even the world was holding its breath. Frost clung to the new grass, and mist curled low in the valleys, painting the Wyoming fields in blue and silver. For the first time in weeks, Paige didn't rush through chores. She moved quietly, almost reverently, gathering Ember's worn blanket and the notebook that now chronicled the filly's entire journey. I found myself walking the fence line, boots soaking through with dew, heart pounding for what was about to come. Jo Garcia arrived just before dawn, her old blue truck crunching over the gravel one last time. She didn't say much, just tipped her hat and gave Paige a nod. Bill showed up too, parking out by the road so his headlights wouldn't spook the Mustang. He stood beside us in silence, a thermos of coffee in one hand, eyes glistening with unspoken pride. It felt right that the small circle who'd fought for Ember, who'd kept her alive, hidden and wild, were together at the end. The pasture gate creaked as Paige unlatched it, her hands trembling, the notebook tucked under her arm. She knelt beside Ember, who stood poised and alert, the morning sun already turning her copper coat to fire. Paige whispered softly, pressing her forehead to Ember's for a moment. I couldn't hear the words, but I felt the weight of them. A goodbye, a promise, a blessing. Jo gave a small signal, and I stepped forward, swinging the gate wide so nothing stood between Ember and the open land. For a long suspended moment, Ember stood at the threshold, tail flicking, ears twitching, as she tasted the freedom in the air. She glanced back at us, at Paige, at me, at Jo and Bill, her eyes wild and bright. "Go on, girl," I said, my voice cracking as tears pricked my eyes. "This is your world. Go find it." With a flick of her head, Ember took off. She broke into a run, hooves thundering across the frosty field, mane catching the sunrise. The power of her movement stunned me. No hesitation, no fear now, just raw instinct. She cut across the pasture and didn't stop at the far fence. She soared over the ditch, hit the crest of the ridge, and for a heartbeat, she was silhouetted in gold, framed by the rising sun. We stood there, rooted, breathless, tears and laughter mixed together. Paige clung to my arm, sobbing and grinning at once. Even Jo, who'd seen more Mustang goodbyes than any of us, wiped her eyes and whispered, "Run far, little firebrand, run far." Ember paused at the top of the ridge, turning back for a single glance. I don't know if I imagined it, but I could have sworn I saw gratitude there, a flash of memory, cold kitchens and warm hands, lullabies and hope. Then she was gone, vanishing into the golden light, swallowed up by the wild that had called her from the start. The silence that followed was deep and bittersweet. Bill passed around his coffee, and nobody said a word for a while. The world felt bigger, emptier, but it was a good emptiness, a space where hope could grow. Joe broke the silence first, voice rough. That's how it's supposed to be. Not every story ends with a happy home, but sometimes the happiest ending is letting go. She squeezed Paige's shoulder, then turned to leave. If you ever want to help another wild one, you know where to find me. Paige lingered at the gate long after the others left, tracing patterns in the dirt with her boot. Do you think she'll be okay out there, Lena? Her voice was small, uncertain. I nodded, even though my chest ached. She made it through worse. She's smart and she's strong. She'll find her place. She'll be free. We walked the pasture in silence, picking up Ember's feed buckets, folding away the blankets, letting the world close around the gap she left behind. All day, I found myself glancing toward the ridge, half hoping to see a copper flash. But the field was empty, the only proof of her journey, a line of hoofprints stretching into the horizon. At dusk, I climbed up to the ridge, heart pounding with hope and longing. The sun had set, but the sky was still painted in pink and orange. I scanned the open land with binoculars, searching for any sign. Far off, just where the sagebrush thickened, I caught a glimpse, a flicker of movement, the outline of a Mustang weaving through the grass. My breath caught. Ember. She moved with caution, pausing often, but she kept moving east, in the direction of the wild herds. As I watched her disappear, I felt pride swell in my chest, pushing out the ache of loss. We had given her what she needed most, a second chance, a wild hope. No matter what happened, her story was hers to write now. I returned home, the air cool and sweet, the porch lights flickering on as Paige waited for me. We sat together in the quiet, listening to the wind and the distant call of a nightbird. She's really gone, isn't she? Paige whispered, tears glinting on her cheeks. I nodded, pulling her close. She is, and I think we did the bravest thing we could do. We let her go. And in the hush that followed, I felt it. The peace that comes only from loving something enough to set it free. The days that followed Ember's release passed in a strange mixture of relief and suspense. The ranch felt quieter, each sunrise arriving without the familiar sound of Ember's restless hooves in the feed room. But the world beyond our fences was alive with tension. Paige and I couldn't shake the feeling that Ember's journey wasn't over, that her survival now depended on things we could no longer control. We'd taken to carrying the binoculars up the ridge each morning, searching the open range for any sign of her. Sometimes, as the sun crested the hills, we'd spot a flash of copper in the distance, a wild shape moving through the tall grass, pausing at the edge of the sagebrush. Each time our hearts leapt in our chests. That's her, Paige would whisper, squeezing my arm tight. She's out there, Lena. She's still fighting. It was one thing to set Ember free. It was another to watch her try to earn her place among the wild ones. The herd that ranged these hills was legendary, descendants of outlaws and survivors, Mustangs who had never bowed to a human hand. They traveled in a shifting mass, led by a gray mare with scars on her flanks and wisdom in her eyes. For days, Ember lingered at the edges, never quite close enough to join them, but never straying too far away. Through the binoculars, we watched her approach, only to be driven back by the herd's lead mare, who bared her teeth and charged with a flurry of hooves. Ember danced away, tail high, but she didn't give up. Day after day she shadowed the herd, eating when they ate, drinking when they drank, learning their patterns and rules. It was a trial by fire, and there were moments when my heart clenched with fear that she'd be rejected or hurt. Once I saw a stallion snap at her, sending her running to the far edge of the field. But each time Ember circled back, her resolve stronger than before. One evening, as a thunderstorm rolled in across the plains, we stood on the ridge, rain soaking through our jackets, binoculars pressed to our faces. The herd huddled beneath a stand of cottonwoods, and Ember stood just outside their circle, shivering but unbowed. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the drama below. The lad mare approached Ember, nostrils flaring, ears pinned. For a long moment, they stood nose to nose, silent and tense, the wildness in both of them palpable. Then, to our amazement, the old mare stepped aside. Ember inched forward, her body tense, waiting for another blow. Instead, the mare turned and nudged her gently toward the center of the herd. Paige let out a sob of relief, dropping the binoculars to her chest. She did it. She's in. It felt like witnessing a secret ceremony, a rite older than any law or fence. Ember moved into the herd's center, surrounded by the others, her copper coat shining in the rain. They pressed close, sharing their warmth, accepting her not as an intruder, but as one of their own. We watched until the storm passed and the sky cleared. The herd drifted away through the wet grass, Ember moving with them, her stride matched to theirs. Each time she glanced back at the ridge, my heart soared. "She knows we're here," Paige whispered, wiping her cheeks with trembling hands. She's saying goodbye in her own way. The days that followed were easier, and yet strangely emptier. We slipped back into old routines, fixing fences, tending cattle, watching the seasons change. But Ember's story traveled with us, a kind of invisible tether stretching across the hills. Word spread in town about the filly who'd survived the ice, who'd found her place among the wild ones. Joe stopped by now and then, sharing news from the Mustang advocates. "Your girl's tough," she said one morning, sipping coffee on our porch. "She's got a reputation already. Folks say she's fearless, but smart. That's the best kind of wild." Bill sent us photos from his trail cameras, blurry shots of the herd moving through the valley. Ember always just on the edge of the frame, her copper coat unmistakable. Dr. Garrison wrote us a letter, thanking us for reminding him why he'd started working with horses in the first place. Even strangers left notes at our gate. "Thank you for giving her a chance. Keep fighting for the wild ones." But the truest changes happened inside us. At dusk, when the wind rattled the eaves and the fields glowed gold with sunset, Paige and I sat on the porch, talking about what Ember had taught us, about resilience, courage, and letting go. I saw it in the way Paige carried herself now, her grief tempered with pride. "She was never really ours to keep," Paige said one night, voice soft as the breeze, "but we got to help her remember who she was. That's enough." Sometimes, when the moon was high and the night quiet, I thought I heard hoofbeats on the old frozen lake or glimpsed a copper flash by the cottonwoods. Maybe it was just memory, or maybe it was Ember, still carrying a piece of us in her wild heart. Either way, we knew she was home. The ranch felt different after Ember joined the wild herd, quieter in a way that didn't settle so much as ache. At first I kept thinking I'd hear her in the pre-dawn hours, her restless hoofbeats in the feed room, the soft nicker that used to greet me on those cold mornings. Instead, the stillness echoed. Paige would sometimes leave the porch door open as she worked, listening for a sound that never came. Some losses are sharp and sudden, a break you can point to. Others are a slow, spreading emptiness, like water sinking into dry ground. That's what Ember's absence felt like. Every part of the ranch held a memory, from the blankets in the old feed room to the patch of pasture where she first learned to stand on trembling legs. Each morning, as I made coffee or fixed the fence lines, I'd find myself looking for a copper flash in the distance, half hoping, half dreading that I'd see her again. At first, I wondered if Paige would let the grief swallow her. She stopped playing guitar in the evenings, her music replaced by long, silent walks out past the creek. But one morning, I found her in the kitchen with the notebook open, pen moving steadily as she wrote down everything Ember had taught us. "I don't want to forget," she said when she caught me watching. "Not just what happened, but why it mattered." Those first weeks, news of Ember traveled like wind through town. The vet stopped by with a thank you note, signed by every member of his staff. Joe posted Ember's story on social media, and dozens of comments flooded in. Some from folks we knew, many from strangers who'd never seen the ranch but somehow understood what it meant to give a wild thing a second chance. The local paper ran a feature. "Frozen Lake Miracle. Mustang filly returns to the wild." For a while, our mailbox overflowed with letters, drawings from children, thank yous from horse lovers, even a hand-stitched patch from a Mustang rescue group. Those tokens helped, but they didn't fill the empty places. The house still felt too big, the days too long. Sometimes, when the evening light slanted across the fields, I'd close my eyes and imagine I heard hoofbeats in the fading gold, or catch a phantom glimpse of a copper mane flickering by the cottonwoods. Paige said she felt it too, the sense that Ember was still with us, not in body, but in all the ways she'd changed our lives. One afternoon, as rain threatened on the horizon, I drove out to the ridge with Paige. We set up the binoculars and watched the wild herd move across the plain. Ember wasn't always easy to spot. She'd learned caution, weaving through the group, never lingering too long at the edge. But every now and then, she'd break from the mass, darting ahead, bucking in the tall grass. Every bit the survivor we'd fought so hard to save. Watching her was bittersweet. I felt pride, yes, but also a sharp ache, a longing for the soft moments in the kitchen, the quiet nights beside her stall. But Paige squeezed my shoulder and said softly, "This is what love is, Lena. It's not keeping them close. It's knowing when to let go, and believing they'll find their way." The weeks wore on, and Ember's story began to ripple outward. A local Mustang group started an online campaign, "Give the Wild a Chance," and folks donated in Ember's name, raising money for feed, fencing, and advocacy. Joe returned to the ranch with a group of volunteers, teaching us and anyone who'd listen about Mustang protection and the challenges of living alongside the wild herds. Bill brought his daughter Katie, who'd first brought carrots for Ember, and together they built a new shelter near the creek for future rescues. I realized then that Ember's absence wasn't a void, but a door. She'd left behind a legacy, one that grew with every person who learned her story, every rancher who saw the wild herd and thought twice before calling the BLM, every kid who dreamed of saving a Mustang. We'd lost her in the everyday sense, but gained something lasting and far-reaching. Late one night, Paige and I sat on the porch, wrapped in old quilts, mugs of coffee cooling in our hands. The stars overhead were bright and endless. Paige broke the silence. "Do you ever regret it? Letting her go?" I thought about it. Really thought. About the fear and pain, the hope and the heartbreak. Then I shook my head. No, not once. If anything, I wish we'd known sooner how much difference one wild horse could make. Paige smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She made us braver, made us see things clearer. I think she made this whole valley braver, honestly. In the quiet that followed, I felt the ranch breathe, a long, slow exhale, not of sadness, but of gratitude and possibility. I realized that love, real love, doesn't end with loss. It echoes out, shaping the world, offering courage to anyone willing to risk a broken heart for the sake of something wild and precious. Sometimes in the dusk, I still swore I heard hoofbeats or saw a flicker of copper between the pines. But more than that, I saw the change Ember left behind, in Paige, in myself, in every wild Mustang running free across the Wyoming hills. That was the miracle after all. Not just survival, but transformation. For Ember, for us, for the wild. I think about Ember every single day. Sometimes it's just a flash, a memory of her first breath in our kitchen, or the echo of her whinny at dawn, or the shadow she cast on the far ridge as she vanished into the wild. Other times, her presence is everywhere, in the flick of a tail glimpsed across the pasture, the hush that falls before a storm, the way the wind bends the grass just so. She is both gone and not gone, forever a part of this land and our lives. In the months since Ember ran free, life on the ranch has found a new rhythm. The seasons turn, the cattle graze, fences need mending, and the work never stops. But beneath it all, something fundamental has changed in us, something Ember gave us in return for her second chance. We walk slower now, eyes open to the wild things living alongside us. We speak up when we hear talk of new roundups, and we share Ember's story with anyone who will listen. Paige has become a quiet advocate, reaching out to other ranchers, writing letters to the local paper, even speaking at the elementary school about what it means to live beside wild horses. She tells the kids about courage, about how real love sometimes looks like letting go, not holding tight. I watch her stand in front of a classroom, her voice steady, her smile real, and I realize how far we've both come from the scared, desperate women who dragged a half-frozen foal off the ice so many months ago. We don't see Ember up close anymore. The herd keeps its distance, as it should. But once or twice, when the sun hits just right and the wind is out of the east, I've caught a glimpse of her. She moves with confidence now, sleek and strong, her copper coat bright against the gray and brown of the hills. The lud mare allows her at the center, and sometimes, just for a moment, she'll stop at the crest of the ridge and look our way. I like to think she remembers us, not as her saviors, but as the ones who helped her find her way home. I've learned that real love isn't about possession. It isn't about shaping the wild to fit our lives, or keeping what we save within reach. It's about faith, the kind that trusts a Mustang to the mercy of the open plains, the kind that lets a story go out into the world with no promise of return. It's about sacrifice and hope, and the belief that what you give comes back to you in ways you never expect. Looking back, I see now how many small miracles added up to Ember's survival. The neighbor who stopped his truck and called for help, the vet who came through a blizzard, the strangers who sent blankets, messages, and prayers, Joe Garcia and the Mustang advocates who showed us how to honor the wild, even Bill, gruff and practical, who hid his own heart in the kindness of hay bales and coffee on cold mornings. Every hand, every gesture, every ounce of hope mattered. That's how wild things survive, not just by their own grit, but by the way a community chooses to show up again and again. If you're reading this or listening to our story, I hope you'll remember that. I hope you'll see that every wild horse matters, not because they're beautiful or rare or free, but because they remind us of what's possible when we fight for something bigger than ourselves. If you've ever felt small or helpless or lost, remember Ember, a filly who should have died on a frozen lake, who survived because a handful of people decided she was worth saving, and who ran wild again because love wouldn't let her be caged. I want to leave you with this. The wild still calls to all of us. It asks us to be brave, to speak up, to make room for mystery and beauty that don't belong to anyone. So if you care about wild horses, about second chances, about the courage it takes to let go, please join us. Support Mustang advocacy. Spread the word. Teach your kids to cherish the wild heart of America, whether it beats in a Mustang's chest or their own. Paige and I still sit on the porch most evenings, watching the light shift across the fields. Sometimes we talk about Ember, sometimes about the future. Always, there's gratitude. Deep, unshakable gratitude for the chance to be part of something wild and rare. And every so often, as dusk settles and the first stars appear, I hear it, a faint drumming on the wind, the unmistakable beat of Mustang hooves running free. I close my eyes and listen, and for a moment, the ranch is alive with hope. For a moment, I remember what it means to love without fear. If this story has touched you, please like and subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, freedom, and the wild heart of America. Share Ember's journey. Support the organizations fighting for Mustangs everywhere. And above all, never stop believing in second chances, because sometimes the wildest hope is the one that changes everything. Thank you for joining us. If you believe in wild horses, second chances, and the courage to let go, help us spread the word. Support Mustang advocacy, cherish the wild, and keep hope alive in every corner of this country.